But I do think that that can be a little misleading for a lot of people, because especially if they're reading the article, if they're watching another creator that's posting, you know, this video that's saying, oh, Resident Evil 9 is going to be open world, then you run the risk where you're going to be, you know, kind of tricking a lot of people if
Right.
it doesn't turn out to be true. And you know, I think I was seeing another creator talk about how at the end of his videos, he usually says, take it with a grain of salt, guys. But throughout the whole video, his title, his thumbnail is kind of implying that it's true.
It's interaction bait is what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely clickbait.
That's as far as I would go in terms of the direction they take it. Again, like you said, well, the open world, I personally don't see that happening. The RPG elements, I don't think it really works for a Resident Evil game. If they were to do a spin-off, they could experiment. For the mainline games, I personally wouldn't bother, but that's just me. That just seems more like a correlation than anything.
Yeah,
like an educated guess.
Exactly, and that's what I think. A lot of what Dusk Golem says seems to be on that kind of fine line of educated guesses, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So in today's video, we're actually going to be dissecting 2 Resident Evil 9 links. I'm also joined by Byrus the Virus. We're also going to be talking about when we can expect Resident Evil 9 to release and our thoughts on what characters should return for Resident Evil 9. But in any case, let's get started with the video. Resident Evil 9 open world. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Byrus. I don't know if you heard, but there was that known leaker that's on Twitter. Dusk Golem, essentially, he posted a thing basically saying that the whole Resident Evil 9 was going to be open world because Dragon's Dogma 2 used the same Rex engine. And so, you know, the newer version of the Rex engine. And his whole theory was, well, I mean, his leak was that because Dragon's Dogma 2 used that new Rex engine and Capcom was essentially experimenting with the open world aspect, that was going to be the same case for Resident Evil 9. They were going to implement the same aspects and have it truly open world. Now, I don't know if you actually play Dragon's Dogma 2, but it's pretty freaking huge. And to be honest, I'm just going to start off the bat, right off the bat, and say that I don't think that's true. I think this is just an educated guess. But what are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I honestly don't think it is either. Resident Evil's best when it's formed, formulaic. When, like for example, the recent installments with 8 and 9, 8 and the 4 remake. I like that they give you semi-open world. I don't need a full.
Yeah.
It takes away from the horror a little bit, especially when you're just traversing big landscapes that will probably contain a lot of nothing. In them. Resident Evil's never been much of an RPG game, so to see those elements kind of be put into the new game, I personally don't see it happening. It would be interesting to see how it's tackled, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's just something thrown out on a whim.
Yeah, that was my feelings about it as well. Like I talked a little bit about it on a previous live stream, and it was weird to me because the same thing, like you said, Resident Evil's always been kind of semi-open world, like RE4 remake, like you mentioned, even the village going around. And so, I mean, there is some of that aspect of you going back and forth and stuff. Obviously, what's that called when you're going back and forth, like in Resident Evil genre? What is it? Backtracking. There's a lot of backtracking in Resident Evil, and so you kind of have to have like those kind of areas be semi-open world, or else there would be no backtracking. So, as mentioned, Resident Evil's always had that. So him extending that and saying that Dragon's Dogma 2 is like an actual open world game. You actually can go, you know, and fill the map up. I did play a little bit of it. Thank you, Capcom, for sending me the code. But yeah, it was. I don't see that being the same thing. That would just be weird, honestly. It'd be too big. And it would honestly be more of like an RPG. You would have to switch it. And I mean, one could also make the argument that Capcom was thinking of making Resident Evil into an RPG with that weird decision with Resident Evil 7. I saw you just played it, Byrus, just a couple days ago, right? You posted that video.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm talking about, that decision at the end of the game where it's like RPG style, but it makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. It takes away from the story, especially when the following DLC immediately makes the decision to go with Zoe, not canon.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. For those of you that don't know, the end of Resident Evil 7, you do have to pick, you know, between Zoe and, of course, your wife, Mia, and you kind of have to do a weird decision to base off. And I loved how in your video you were like, oh, I'm going to pick the chick that I've known, you know, my actual wife, and then just the chick that I've never actually met in person, but just like a couple seconds ago.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
My wife that's been missing for 3 years and is the whole reason it came out here, or a random girl who's been hiding this whole game. going with Mia.
It's fine. It was foolish thinking I could escape.
Oh, shut up.
And just like you said, I mean, the whole DLC kind of negated that choice. So it doesn't really make much sense. And you know what? I would also argue as well that Resident Evil 8 Village also, it seemed like they were going to do the same thing. And the point that I'm referring to is that weird choice where Heisenberg in the factory talks to Ethan and asks him, like, hey, like, do you want to like, I could join you to defeat Mia. That was also weird. It almost seemed like they kind of backtracked. Like they were like, oh, let's let's actually do the same thing that we did in RE7. But you know what? We're just gonna backpedal. We're not gonna do that. So at the end, it just was kind of weird that Heisenberg kind of switched his character and wanted to talk with Ethan and kind of join forces. What do you think about that?
Well, I definitely see your point where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But they did lay the seeds in the game throughout the story that he had issues with Miranda. That bitch Miranda. You'd always be muddling that.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that that could have been a thing. However, again, they would make a choice and it wouldn't end up being canon by the end of it anyway. They'd probably end up scrapping it regardless. So
yeah,
I'm glad if they did initially choose to go that route that they didn't.
Yeah.
Just because if I'm gonna play a Resident Evil game, I know I'm playing it for the horror aspect, and the story. Yeah. So if you're then gonna add, like, for example, if they were to do this in RE9 where they were to make branching choices, you're gonna have to make multiple endings because you don't want it to be like a Telltale situation. As much as I love those games,
yeah,
they do it where, hey, your choices matter, but they don't really, because at the end of the day, the story still proceeds this one way anyway. You just have slight little alterations, which again is fine. But if you're not gonna go full-fledged in it like a Baldur's Gate 3, then I wouldn't bother.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I mean the fact that throughout the whole story you do see those notes where, like, and you also see scenes where Heisenberg and Lady Dimitrescu kind of have, like, they're kind of butting heads throughout the whole story. They obviously don't like each other, so he is kind of like an odd one out of the whole odd bunch. But yeah, it was weird. It almost seemed like the devs were kind of planning on doing that route. And I actually have some nuclear news, guys. Big news. It's a little too early to say, but I might. I don't know. You know what? I don't know if I should say, but I got actually invited to Calgary Expo. And Calgary Expo, there's gonna be a bunch of celebrities that are gonna be there, and I can actually interview some of them. So, and one of the persons that's going to be there is Neil Newbon, who voiced Heisenberg, also Astarion in Baldur's Gate 3. So that's a good question to ask him as well. I don't know. I'm just thinking that's actually good. That's going to happen in 2 weeks, guys. So if anybody's going to go to Calgary, Cat's in Canada, by the way, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be talking to a bunch of the people there. As mentioned, I still don't know about the interview. I have to send an email because you have to talk to the media team about that. So I got to do that today. I got to do that. So yeah, I've been a little busy, but that's a question that has always been, I don't know, it's always been on my mind. Like, dude, like, where are they going to do that? That's the other thing. Yeah, well, you were talking about how RPGs, right? RPGs, like, for example, Baldur's Gate 3, they have permutations. So you could make a decision in Act 1 that'll affect Act 3. Kind of like Mass Effect. If you make a decision in Mass Effect 1, that will change the outcome of Mass Effect 3. Same thing with the Dragon Age games. These are all BioWare, right? I mean, well, the first Baldur's Gate were BioWare, but yeah, honestly, I thought that was very strange that they tried to incorporate that kind of aspect with Resident Evil 7. But I mean, you could also make the argument that Resident Evil 7 was trying to change things up, right? Like, it was like a reboot. They tried to, they obviously were experimenting with a bunch of stuff. Like, for example, the video recorders, right? The tape recorders to save, the cassette, the cassette players. It seems like they were trying to move away from the typewriter, but it's kind of sad that RE8 kind of just negated it completely and didn't bring any of those aspects. If anything, RE8 kind of felt like they went back to RE4. It's almost like RE4 had like a baby with RE7, honestly. I don't know.
I didn't honestly. I know some people have their issues with 8 as well.
Yeah.
I personally liked it. Again, you had bigger environments which weren't just confined to the small Louisiana house, which was nice because again it gave those elements of RE4, which again, if a formula is not broke, why fix it? right?
Yeah.
So I personally enjoyed it because it was a little bit like RE4.
Yeah.
Obviously there's always issues that are gonna arise from it.
Yeah.
I think the 4 remake definitely improved on that formula a lot more, but that's as far as I would go in terms of the direction they take it. Again, like you said, well, the open world, I personally don't see that happening. The RPG elements, I don't think it really works for a Resident Evil game. If they were to do a spin-off, they could experiment. For the mainline games, I personally wouldn't bother, but that's just me.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. 100% agree with you. Yeah, I like going back to the first topic, right, of RE9 being open world. It's a little sus to me. It almost seems like he's trying to. It almost seems like this leaker, who, by the way, I should mention, I don't like talking about other creators or other people, right? I guess he's not a creator; he's just like a Twitter guy. But for me, I don't really believe a lot of his leaks. He has had stuff that is true, so I'll give him that. Obviously, it's not like everything he says is a complete lie. Like a lot of, like, compared to all of the other leaks and rumors guys that, like, rumors that are people that, you know, instigated those rumors, especially with RE4. I don't know if you remember that with Resident Evil 4. There were so many rumors.
Oh, yes.
Just crazy stuff. Like, you know, there's not going to be the island. I didn't follow them, honestly, because I always said on my channel, don't believe these rumors. Don't trust rumors. And obviously, this guy has had stuff that's been true, but there's also been stuff that he's gotten wrong. So, you know, I was having a conversation with some of my viewers I think about a month ago or a month and a half ago, on one of my videos, and some people were kind of upset that I said that he's not reliable. And my whole argument is that reliability is when you're like 80. I think the definition is like if you're like, most of the stuff that you do or the stuff that you say, like around the 80% range comes out to be true. Like if I'm going to be here at this time, if I say I'm going to do something, then that means that, you know, and 80% of the time I do it, then that, you know, it kind of gives me that reliability, you know. So
exactly.
But with this leaker, he doesn't have that. Sometimes it's been wrong, sometimes he's been right. And it's not just me that's saying that. You know, if you see a lot of articles before in the rumors that that talk about Dusk Golem, they do say that, you know, he's gotten some stuff right and some stuff wrong. So a lot of people like to say the famous sentence, take it with a grain of salt. But I do think that can be a little misleading for a lot of people, because especially if they're reading the article, if they're watching another creator that's posting, you know, this video that's saying, oh, Resident Evil 9 is going to be open world, then you run the risk where you're going to be, you know, kind of tricking a lot of people if it doesn't turn out to be true. And you know, I think I was seeing another creator talk about how at the end of his videos, he usually says, take it with a grain of salt, guys. But throughout the whole video, his title, his thumbnail is kind of implying that it's true.
It's interaction bait is what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely clickbait. And unfortunately, the Resident Evil community has a lot of that. And so that's what was running with Resident Evil 4. What was your take on all of that stuff before, like, 2022, 2023, early 2023?
To be honest, I avoided as much as possible. I just waited to see what was fact that came out. I don't want to get myself, again, I don't want to get in these interaction baits, because I don't want to set myself up for failure, which is a lot of things. Like a good example right now is the Silent Hill 2 remake. A lot of stuff coming out about it, a lot of stuff people are being wary. It's one thing to take it with a grain of salt, it's another thing to just print interaction bait that is very well misleading and ends up hurting not only the fans' trust, but also your own reputation.
That's a very good point.
And again, with a game like RE4, like I said earlier, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So when I'm hearing stuff like the island I'm like, I don't know, that's a pretty integral part of the story. I don't see them cutting out a third of the game.
No Krauser
for this. Like I like when I heard that, I'm like, okay, I don't believe this. But again, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But you know, stuff like that, I like you said, take with a grain of salt.
Or just what I usually tell my viewers is don't believe it unless you have concrete and evidence or concrete information. It's up in the air and you can't take it at all. You can't, like, trust it a little bit. And also, that was a very good point that you mentioned as well. A lot of creators were kind of just clickbaiting and kind of using that, and they did lose a lot of reputation Like a lot of those
course.
guys. There's no
Yeah.
way that you can't, because it's like you make videos upon videos upon videos of like, oh, this is what's gonna happen. This is what's gonna happen, guys. And then at the end of the video, like the last 10 seconds, you say, oh, but take it with a grain of salt. That doesn't work, because I mean, you know, as a YouTuber, not everybody watches to the end, right?
Right.
So
it's a lot of contradiction too. Again,
Yeah.
like you said, you're hurting that reputation by printing false information. Again, these leaks may have something, like people obviously dig into files and they see these things that could
Yeah.
potentially lead to it
Yeah.
as such. Either sometimes people are reading into it, or it's maybe something that's since been scrapped,
yeah,
or was just briefly talked about. So again, anything can change up until the release date. You never know up until we get in our own hands playing it ourselves. So it's something, again, like Wesker always says, you gotta just be wary of what you're seeing.
but that's very interesting too. I mean, that's another good point too, is that what if somebody gets a leak and then, you know, 2 years later in the development, they just decide to scrap all of that idea. So then that leak, you could argue that that leak was true, but it was just outdated. So that could also be that's a very good point as well. So yeah, it's kind of a gamble. That's why when I talk about leaks and stuff like we're doing today, I always say, like, guys, like it's just all speculation. I'm giving my thoughts. And as we just talked with Byrus, right? Byrus is also here. Very good point on how Resident Evil 9 open world isn't it doesn't really make much sense. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense to switch the whole game into an RPG when it seems like RE7 did that, was trying that, and then they kind of stopped themselves at the DLC. And then when Resident Evil 8 came out with Heisenberg, that just went completely out the window. Like, they're not doing that anymore. You know, like RA4 wasn't like that. RA3 remake wasn't like that. So why would it be now that they're going to make it open world like that?
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what you said about 7.
Yeah.
Once again, they give you the option to choose between one or the other, but the story still leads the same way anyway.
There's
you
still
still
a
get the same
canon.
outcome, so there's no real change to anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Which just
So-
kind of makes it pointless at the end of the day, right? Like, why would you pick Zoe if there's a DLC? Like, it just what's the point? You know, what's the point of playing that? It's just, it becomes a what if scenario.
Yeah,
And it's like,
basically.
Resident Evil doesn't really have a lot of that. So yeah.
Mhm.
Anyways, guys, I'm sorry for the chats. Let's read that. And we're also going to be continuing. We got more to cover on leaks. Natalie says, but I don't think RE needs choices. Yeah, I don't think so either. As Byrus mentioned, it's not really, RE isn't really like an RPG, right? I mean, it isn't. So that would be weird, right? I mean, the only RPG kind of components, I think, is probably RE4, where you could kind of power up your weapons. But I don't know, because you're not powering up yourself, right? I mean, you could argue that throughout the whole series, you can get armor for yourself or get like item packs and kind of boost your character up like that. There's also weapon upgrades, but it's never the character. So I don't know what classifies an RPG.
Well, that's just a sign of progression, right?
Yeah. But I don't know when it's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know when it's actually characterized. Because I know, like, action RPGs, like, I'm just thinking of the Ryuga Gotoku series or the Like a Dragon series. You do level up your character, right? You do level them up, and then that just constitutes as an RPG because you do go off and do a bunch of side missions. But, I mean, RE4 Remake did add side missions as well. So that's why, I mean, like, as we mentioned, there is, like, a semi-open worldness to Resident Evil, right? So, like, even the OG RE4, you could also argue with, like, the medallions. That was technically a side quest, right? Even back then. So, but it's never been a full RPG. So do I think that's going to happen? No. Yeah. Natalie says, are we worried that RE9 is going to be all action, no horror? I don't know. No, I don't know. I think it might be the opposite.
Not.
I
hope it's more horror.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
that's wishful thinking from me.
You know what?
I feel like because they introduced, sorry to cut you off, but with the
go ahead.
BSAA stuff, since they really started teasing that more,
Yeah.
I feel like we'll probably get a lot more of that RE5 action than we will get with like that RE7. RE4R was a good combination of both, personally.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're moving in the direction because, for example, when Resident Evil 7 came out, it didn't perform as well as they would have liked because unfortunately horror doesn't sell as good as an action game. It caters to more masses and more people aren't really willing to play a horror oriented game. It's just not a lot of people's forte. So I see why they definitely changed it, especially with the original RE4, how they went that way, and then of course 5 and 6 followed suit. And then with RE4R, they kind of went and did a little bit of both, but still kept it more action oriented. And I feel like this will be somewhat of the same thing, especially with 8 as well, kind of leaning back on that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Personally, for me, I've always said this, that it's a delicate balance. With Resident Evil, you can't go too much horror, because then you're gonna get House Beneviento, where it's like un-Resident Evil, where you need to have defense, like you need to have a knife or something to defend yourself, or else it loses the survival aspect of the horror, right? Because then it's just horror. So I've always stated that Resident Evil, it's always a delicate balance of that survival aspect. The action aspect is also there, and that was first seen with Nemesis, but obviously the horror. So it's a delicate balance between the survival, horror, and action, in my opinion, because if you lose, action, then you're just going to have a walking simulator. Then it's going to be like House Beneviento for Shadow of Rose and RE8, and that's not very too much like Resident Evil, as mentioned. And if it's too action and no horror, then you're going to get something like Resident Evil 6, where nobody liked it, or even RE5 was very actiony and the horror was like maybe 20%. You know what I mean? Well, I would say for RE6 is a little more like that. But yeah, so and obviously the survival aspect is also very important. So you need to have that balance. If it's not, then like I would even argue that RE8 didn't really do a good job of having the horror, the survival, and the action. I don't know. It felt more actiony. It seemed like they just kind of upped it compared to RE7. So
Definitely, yeah.
That's why a lot of people didn't really like RE8, right? Like RE7 fans. And it's funny because I've stated this before. We were having a conversation about that last discussion that we had. Was one of my problems that I have with RE7 is that it's a very different game compared to other Resident Evils. It's very different. Obviously, you have a lot of nods to the original and stuff, but it's very different because of that horror was upped a lot more, in my opinion. There was a lot of horror movie references, even more than usual. Obviously, Resident Evil has always had those, but it was a little more than usual, and that made it so that if Resident Evil 7 was the first game you've played in the series, playing RE8 or playing any other game is not gonna kind of quench that thirst or of playing another game that's like exactly like RE7, because we just haven't had that. I mean, RE7 was kind of a reboot. It was kind of, they were experimenting with things, but there's no other game like it, like 100% like it. I mean, you could say RE8, but as we've just discussed, the action kind of made it more RE4-esque, but I don't think it was as memorable as RE4. So it's definitely not on that. It's definitely not higher than RE4 on my list, is what I'm getting at, right? But yeah, do I think that RE9 will have that? I'm hoping, but it's a good question. It's a good question. I do hope that it's just a delicate balance. Like if they could get RE4 remake down, then I think RE9, if as Byrus was saying, if they could do the same thing with what they did with RE4 remake, then I think it'll be great. Let's run through this because guys, we gotta continue. But yeah, I felt like RE8 turned down the horror, and I'm worried that trend is going to continue. Yes. It should take place on London, and there should be an outbreak there. That would be cool. Yeah, other European cities would be cool, because we were in Romania, but we weren't in like a city. We were like in the outskirts, So right. I do want to go to more of like a city again, in my opinion. It could be a small town, but a little bit bigger than like a little village, in my opinion. Krauser being cut was a big stupid leak. Yeah, yeah. Flaming Pestle, definitely. RE games need to be more horror. Yeah, especially the newer ones. But as we've discussed, I think RE4 did a good balance. Josh says, I also feel we need Revelations 3 as well to wrap up Natalia's cliffhanger. Yes, Joseph. We talked about, I talked about that in my theory video on how I think Natalia should be the new villain for Resident Evil 9. That would be cool, because Resident Evil likes to leave things kind of out in the open, like they kind of leave us in a cliffhanger. But what was interesting was that Resident Evil Death Island also closed the loop with Maria, right? Maria was one of those things where we were like, okay, she's alive in Resident Evil Vendetta, so what's happening? But Death Island kind of just wrapped that story up, which was nice. Sheriff says, well, if 9 continues a BSA HQ plot point, then it almost safe bet that's going to be set in London since HQ is located in the UK. Yes, Sheriff. Yeah, we were talking about that. Best to learn on the side of caution when it comes to leaks. Fun to talk about and theorize, but don't take them as a fact. Exactly. Yeah, I agree. We will have a clear picture as soon as we see a reveal trailer, hopefully sooner than later. Maybe RE10 will be or open world, LOL. RE10. Yeah, I actually want to talk about that's the next thing we're going to be talking about. Maybe by open world, Dusk Golem really meant something like 4R or Village, where you do backtrack a lot and environment changes over the day, but bigger. Who knows? No, it seemed like what he was getting at was that since Dragon's Dogma was open world, it seems like the next one is going to use the similar design, similar engine, right? Because it's the same new Rex engine. So he was making it seem as if it's going to be truly open world.
Yeah, that
So,
seems more.
not
That
semi.
just seems more like a correlation than anything.
Yeah,
Like an educated guess.
exactly, and that's what I think. A lot of what Dusk Golem says seems to be on that kind of fine line of educated guesses, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
agree.
So next up we have RA9 timeline. I don't know if you guys saw that. Let's see if I have it actually on my thing. Let's see. I'll search it up, see if I can show you guys. But Byrus, the next thing I actually wanted to talk to you about is this timeline that popped up. It was a leak saying that Resident Evil 9 showed up on a timeline for Capcom. And we're going to talk about that. Let me just see if I can bring it up. I want to see if I can just show you
I
guys.
think I may have seen this, but I think I might just one of those things I skimmed over.
Okay, hold up. Yeah, I want to show. I'll send it to you as well, Byrus, and then we'll talk about it.
Sounds good. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you to Leon S. Kennedy on the the Discord for posting that a while ago. Awesome. Okay, so I'm actually just going to transition here real quick so everybody can see real quick what we're discussing. I'm going to put, yeah, so as you guys can see, this was the picture that was leaked. It says confidential in the middle. On the left, it says Monster Hunter Sunbreak 2022, right? We'll skip all the way. So it's March 24th, Street Fighter, Separate Ways, Dragon's Dogma, the Dragon Princess on November 2024, Monster Hunter Wilds, and Resident Evil X. Now, this was weird. At first, I thought it said Resident Evil 10. I thought it said Resident Evil 10.
That's what it looked like to me too at first glance.
And then after on Discord, people were telling me, no, it's the I that's in,
The I's
that's
in
in
the L.
L.
Yeah.
Okay, now, no, I'm no graphic designer, but I do dabble with being a YouTuber, right? I mean, you and me both, right? Byrus, what would you say? Does that look legit to you?
No, that looks like a one. If that is real, that's a poor choice, in my humble opinion. That does not. That does not look very good at all.
Yeah, and also it doesn't. Wait, let's zoom in. It doesn't even make sense that the I doesn't even go all the way down, like from the L. Like why? Like why would you?
Well, isn't
do
Roman
this?
numerals? It's V and then 3I.
I think it's
So that.
it's- Oh, is it?
IX? I thought it was VII. Hold on, let me look it up.
Yeah,
real quick.
actually look it up. That's a good question, man. That's a good question.
Oh no, it is IX. Okay, I'm stupid.
It is IX? Okay.
It
No,
is IX,
actually,
yeah.
I was getting second guessing myself too. But yeah, so it's IX. But why would you have the I not go all the way down to the L? That's a weird choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's very strange. The other thing that I'll also say too is that Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Separate Ways have a different font. It's like a font that's black, which I haven't seen before. You know what I mean? Like that seems like somebody made that.
Yeah, the Resident Evil 9 logo, that just looks like something you ripped off of like thefont.com. That looks like something that you would just do there. Like the 4 one is new because it's got like the branches in it.
Yeah.
That I believe is the same font from 7 and 8.
Yeah, but the 8 actually is like an official logo. Like that's a logo you can find. Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Separate Ways. Look at that. That's the other thing that I'll mention too. Look at the Separate Ways. Look at the distance between 4 and Separate Ways. That's a little weird too. Like why not just put separate? Like, I don't know. This does not seem professional. It honestly seems like Dragon's Dogma, the Dragon Princess 2. I mean that I haven't seen any confirmation of Dragon's Dogma 2, the Dragon Princess. That looks interesting. If that turns out to be true, then maybe. But again, that IX just looks really bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like Lady Hugo says, the title looks fan-made, not gonna lie. The green looks terrible, right? Like, it doesn't make, like, why would they do that? And also, wait, let's actually look closer to the font. I'm actually curious here. The font is different, isn't? You got an L there. What about the... Okay, the L and the I have like a slash on the 4. The L doesn't have that in the I. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think that's the same font that was used, unless that was just a placeholder for when they were maybe potentially thinking of it. But this definitely looks like it was, yeah, like they said in chat, fan made.
Yeah.
That's the same font I can use in my thumbnails and stuff, as well as I have the preset for it. That new one is definitely set for the RE4 remake.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This doesn't look believable.
No, I don't think there's several issues with it. Also, it says October 24, 2025. That seems, I mean, it seems doable. And like I said, that's the things with these leaks, right? It seems like it's always, it kind of makes sense, but there's also issues. I don't know. I don't believe it, honestly. There's too many issues with the logo and the green and the I with the X, like the X being with the I and then not covering all the way of the L. That's weird. That's super sus. Because I don't think Capcom would just do that. Like, they have access to dozens of like graphic, designers, if not, you know, like, why would they just come up with something like that? You brought up the counter argument that it could just be a placeholder, but that's a pretty bad placeholder. I don't know.
I agree. That's just me giving whoever made this the benefit of the doubt, but I definitely don't see that being official.
I know, but I was just saying, right? Like that's what that's the counter argument that you would give to somebody kind of defending this, right?
Right.
Like the devil's advocate. So yeah, but I don't know, man. That don't look right. I don't think so. And also, I mean, Resident Evil coming out in 2025. What do you think about that? Like Resident Evil 9.
I'll take it. The sooner, as long as it's finished and polished. Capcom has so far had a pretty decent track record of when they release their stuff on time. It's finished and good. It's not very buggy.
You know what?
But that seems doable.
You know what I was just thinking of as well? Let's bring back the picture. It said Resident Evil IX, right? It's really crappy. But a few years ago, we got the name Resident Evil Apocalypse. Now, as I've stated several times on the channel, we don't know what Apocalypse is. A lot of people were just assuming that it was 9. Because, Village had its own name, so people were thinking, oh, okay, well, Resident Evil Apocalypse is probably going to be Resident Evil 9. But that would be weird if Resident Evil 9 didn't have the name Apocalypse. Like, why wouldn't they just have, like, Apocalypse underneath Resident Evil 4? You could make the argument that, oh, well, like, it was just a long time ago. Like, that was during the pandemic that we got that actual, and by the way, that leak was actually credible. I should state that because that was an official, like, it was actually stated by Capcom that they were leaked in 2020. And a bunch of their files got leaked. So that is a huge data leak that, the company got attacked. Hackers took a bunch of info and kind of gave it out to the public. And that's why we knew that Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Village, we knew that Revelations 3 was called, I always forget the name. It's not Outbreak. It's called something else. Outrage. Resident Evil Outrage. Resident Evil Hunku, which is Resident Evil Hunk, right? Hunku is the Japanese name. And so it would make sense, right? If we knew that Resident Evil 9 was going to happen in October 2025, that would make sense because we did know that Resident Evil 9 was going to be hitting, like, it was in development during 2020, November. So, I mean, 5 years, and we don't know how long they were working on it before, right? Like, I've heard Resident Evil 4 started production in 2018, so that could be the case. We could get a Resident Evil 9 next year. I wouldn't put, I wouldn't downplay that idea.
Well,
RE8
came out what, 21, right? April of 21?
Yeah.
About 4 years time. Yeah, I definitely see it being doable.
Yeah.
That seems about right.
Yeah. Well, as mentioned, right, Resident Evil 4 was being worked on during the same times as Resident Evil Village, during the same time that Resident Evil Apocalypse was also getting worked on, which a lot of people assume is Resident Evil 9. But as mentioned, we don't have 100% confirmation on that, right? So, yeah. Joda says, Justin, Resident Evil 9 will have a logo that looks like a monkey's butt. It's true, guys. The leaks never lie. Are you guys talking about like RE6? Like the RE6 logo? After seeing 6 logo, I'm inclined to believe that. Yeah, you know about the RE6, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you know that. I mean, that's I'm not gonna mention it. If you know, you know, guys. But yeah, that's probably the worst logos I've ever seen for Resident Evil. Is the Resident Evil 6. Dang, I forgot about that. But yeah, IG, the green means that it's a new beginning kind of thing, because 7 and 8 were orange and the rest were red. 7 and 8, 7 was orange, 8 was golden, wasn't it? Yeah, like we have the official one right here. It was golden. Yeah, but 7 was orange, and so yeah, like Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 were all red with white. So, you know what I mean? Like it would make sense for them to continue that route. But do I think green makes sense? I don't know. That doesn't make sense. I don't know. And also, why would Resident Evil 9 look like that? That's another point, right? Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 4 remake all look the same. But that's the image that they're trying to take here with Resident Evil IX. They're trying to make it seem as if it's the remakes. But that's a very good point that Resident Evil 7, 8, Resident Evil 6, 7, and 8, and 9, I imagine, would be like its own thing. So why wouldn't Apocalypse be in the name? Why wouldn't that be the bigger, whatever the name of it is going to be? It's not going to be called Resident Evil IX. You know what I mean? So that would be weird. That doesn't make sense. You know, like Resident Evil 7 was called Biohazard. You know, they were trying to reboot the series, kind of like a Dragon or Yakuza series. So yeah, I'm not buying it. Yeah, Joda says green is such an unappealing color as well. It doesn't make sense from an advertising standpoint. Yeah, I'm not buying it, guys. I think this is a completely made up leak. So, Byrus, I actually want to talk to you about what do you want Resident Evil 9 to be? What in your idea? Like if Capcom gave you the keys to the series, I want to see. Well, let's break it down first. Like what characters do you want to see return? Or would you want new characters to show up? Like, what's your take on that? Just for the characters, I guess, to start.
Well, I think the obvious answer for characters I'd like to see is obviously Chris. I feel like Chris is going to be integral. I feel like they'll definitely bring back Jill. I would like to see, hopefully, some Claire, because Claire doesn't get her due. She gets a lot of flack. She's only ever really been in the one game and then the Rev games. So seeing her come back would be kind of nice.
Revelation.
I'm a big Leon guy. I love me some Leon. I don't think he's gonna be in it.
Yeah, I mean we've kind of had a lot of Leon and Chris. A lot of people seem to be burnt out with those two guys, right? I mean, they're the heavy hitters of Resident Evil. They get their own movies. They get to be in every game. So a lot of people are like, yeah, let's chill out with them. But but as you mentioned, I mean, it is part of the story that's necessary. You do need to have Chris make a comeback because he was at the end of the finale of Resident Evil 8, right? So you can't not have him. But what other characters would you like to maybe see return? Or so you said Claire, you said Jill, you said Chris, you also said Leon. Who else would you want to see? Like if the game only had maybe, I don't know, 4 characters that you had to be there, which would that be? Like I guess we'll narrow it down just a little more.
I think for a narrative sense, I'm probably going to be wrong on this, and I don't even know if I really want to see this myself. But having Rose there in a small capacity, now that she's under watch of the BSAA and Chris, specifically after the events of 8, I wouldn't mind maybe giving her a minor role. I don't know what that role would be, but I think it would make sense in terms of the story. Again, we all know that the Winters, like Ethan and me, are no longer going to be a part of it. 8 was their wrap-up. Yeah. But they could definitely use Rose in some sort of way. It'll probably be like a Sherry situation where she's in the one game and then, quickly discarded after that. But
well, Sherry did show up in RE6. She did show up in RE6, yeah.
Yeah, she was in 6, right. Well, like in 2, she was child. And then she came in 6, and then after that, that was kind of the last you heard of her.
Yeah. I guess my biggest issue with that is that, I mean, we know that from Shadow of Rose, it does take place in 20. She's 16. So
that's true. I always forget about the timeline.
Village, she was like 1, right? I think she was 1, right?
Correct she was fairly newborn.
She's a baby. I know. Let's just say 1 for just the it's for the sake of the argument. So it's going to be 10 years. So 10 years plus that is 31, and then plus 6 or 5, I guess. Right? So that's 2035 or 2036. I don't know.
It all depends where they want to go in the timeline. Yeah. Though, like how far they want to, because they briefly mentioned it about them needing to go after them, but we don't know how long that would be.
Yeah, it almost seems
the events of 8.
It almost seems like Rose is just there in case the story goes past into the future.
Probably.
You know what I mean? Like it seems like Capcom's just kind of laying the foundation for way into the future. But my issue is that obviously since Resident Evil 8 takes place in present day, and I'm assuming Resident Evil 9 is going to be the same thing, you run into the issue where it's like, well, if they're going to skip into all the way to 2035 where everybody's super old, what happened in 2021, right? Like it almost seemed like Resident Evil 8 finished off really quick and kind of set the story up for Resident Evil 9 right away. So
Right.
I think a lot of people will agree that Resident Evil 9 does have to be right after. Like it has to be a couple months or whatever, but it wouldn't make sense because it almost seemed like the story of the beat was like, hey, Chris, we just found out that, you know, the BOWs, the BSAA agents are BOWs. And then Chris is like, what? And so, you know, we're going to BSAA Europe, and then the game ends, you know?
Yeah.
And you get the wrap up of Ethan Winters, but I think it would make sense, you know what I mean, from a story perspective, that you have to finish up, you have to wrap up that tie-in,
Definitely.
right, with the
Yeah.
BOWs before we go into the future. But I do think, as you were talking, right, I do agree that, you know, Rose is there in the future and they can still use her way off, right? Like we don't know how long Resident Evil is going to last. So, you know, if we're here in 2030 and there's Resident Evil, I don't know, 20, you know, like it would make sense that we would get Shadow, you know? I mean, Rose in this instance, right? I mean, she's another hero that they could use. They could also bring back, you know, Jake and Sherry. They would be around like in their 40s. I guess they'd be like, you know, modern day Jake and Sherry. But I guess a lot of people, the issue with Rose, I find, is that the reason they didn't showcase Mia, they didn't showcase Chris or anybody else for that matter, is because they wanted to end the story, and they didn't want to showcase, you know, Grandpa Chris, in my opinion. Because I think it would be really sad for a lot of the community to be like, oh shoot, all the people that I like, Leon's like an old man at that point, you know what I mean? He's like in his 60s, so I don't know their timeline. I don't know when they're actually born. I don't know the dates for that, but I mean, I think Chris was like 46 in Resident Evil 6, right? Somewhere around there, and that takes place in 2013. So 10 years after that, I mean, he's in his 50s for sure. But yeah, I think he'd be in his 60s, but I'm not too sure on that timeline. But yeah, but just for the story's sake. Like if the story of Resident Evil 9, and we are to assume that Resident Evil 9 is going to take place right after Resident Evil 8, which characters would you want to see? Like not Rose though, because Rose is too off in the future.
Mainly, I mainly just Chris and Jill, because I feel like that makes the most sense canonically for both of them to be in it.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm not too sure, because I don't know where this story is going to lead.
Yeah.
I have a feeling they'll somehow bring back Wesker.
Yeah.
I hope not. That wouldn't really make sense. But
Yeah.
I feel like that they're just gonna maybe start relying on some of the OGs once again, which is fine. We're okay with that. That's what most people want. Again,
Yeah, no,
like we said,
definitely,
we haven't really had anything with Jill.
Yeah.
But
because Jill, we haven't seen her since Death Island. Yeah. Death Island takes place in 2015, so we don't know what Jill's been doing in the 6 years from 2015 all the way to 2021, the events of Resident Evil 8. We don't know, because she never showed up in Resident Evil 6, and obviously Resident Evil Death Island explains that she just joined the BSAA again, but again, that's 2015. So Resident Evil 7, we didn't see her. Resident Evil 8, we didn't see her. So what's up with Jill? You know, like we have to know, right? I mean, it just kind of makes sense. But it is nice to see that we did see Jill, because other than that, we didn't see her since Resident Evil 5.
Yeah.
Right at the end. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess that next question was it's kind of like what we discussed before. Where would you want the story to take place? Where would be somewhere as cool that I guess the series doesn't take place in?
I wasn't too sure up until I read, I forgot who said it in chat, but somewhere in Europe, I think that'd be an awesome place to visit, especially for
they were saying London.
Game.
They were saying London.
Yeah, London would be cool. The architecture would probably be really fitting with maybe the story they're trying to tell, right? Especially if they're going to end up doing the whole BSAA
the headquarters
storyline. It would be cool to kind of see that area explored a little bit in and around in the UK. That'd be quite cool, honestly.
Yeah.
In terms of what the story would entail, I have no idea. I'm not too sure where they would take it. I'm sure we'll probably get some tomfoolery.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm kind of optimistic and excited just to see where it goes, because at this point, I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, somebody actually posted a really good question. Joda says they better make Jill blonde. LOL, I think they forgot when she went to Alcatraz. That's a very good point. What are your thoughts on that, Byrus? I mean, we saw Resident Evil 5, and the genetics right? They did the stuff that Wesker was kind of using her as a guinea pig. All of the stuff that he was using, like the viruses and stuff, to make his virus more potent, the Type 2 Plagas variant, it did end up changing her genetic code for her hair. So her hair is naturally blonde now. So what do you think about seeing her, like what Joda said, in Alcatraz with brown hair? What do you think about that?
I feel like they either were trying to retcon it, because I know quite a few people didn't like blonde Jill. I personally didn't really have an issue with it. I think she looked good with blonde hair.
She looks
myself,
good regardless.
that, or they could just be like, yeah, exactly. That, or they could just be like, oh, she's dyeing it because she doesn't like the effect they have on it. Like,
yeah, I agree.
I'm sure they could retcon it somehow.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that would have been better if in Alcatraz and Death Island, if they mentioned that she's been dyeing her hair or whatever. That would have been cool if they had just given us that kind of thing, where it just shows like, okay, well, she's done with all the trauma, and she doesn't want to see her blonde hair anymore, so she's just dyeing it, you know? That would make sense. That's a very good point. But yeah, or like Lady Hugo says, at least have some blonde in it, right? Yeah, Jill having short hair again weirded me out more than the color, lol. Because if she was cured, then it makes sense her hair went back to its normal color. Although, yeah, I wish we would have seen it blonde still, or at least have some blondness in it. Yeah, like Joda says, yeah, like fading it out or something. Sheriff, I will still have Alex, also Jessica, Raymond are up to something. They can't be forgotten. Can't have forgotten about them, right? Right? Exactly. Yeah. That's one of the things that I brought up in my thing in my video for Resident Evil 9 is how they could bring up Alex Wesker for Resident Evil 9. I don't think Wesker's dead, honestly. I do think that he's not, because you guys have seen my theory, but I've always stated that the rocket launchers that hit him at the end of Resident Evil 5 don't necessarily make direct impact. They hit him behind. And so it would be interesting. And you know what? There was a theory going around with Resident Evil 7 and the connections. You know, that whole like occultic group that, you know, Miranda, they kind of talked about it in RE8, where Miranda was working with them to make, you know, what's her face? Eve? Is that her name? Eve? Bro, I forgot her name. What the frick is her name? Evelyn.
Oh my god, yeah.
They made Evelyn in Resident Evil 8. I mean, you guys know my thoughts on Resident Evil 7. I have to play it again, but I was just remembering your video, Byrus. You kind of just, you know, maybe brush up on my RE7 lore. But great video, by the way, guys. If you guys haven't checked that out, go check it out. But yeah, so, you know, they kind of touched upon that, but there was an interesting theory that suggested that the connections... no, wait a second. This is actually factual. The Connections was working with the HCF. Now, for those of you that don't know, HCF was the kind of organization that Wesker made during the events of Code Veronica. And so the theory kind of pushed it. This is not my theory, by the way. I don't remember who made this theory. This was a long time ago. But somebody was suggesting the idea that Wesker was actually the one behind the Connections. That would be really cool. And the reason that would be cool, in my opinion, is because it would kind of set up more lore on the Connections, but also you could already give us like the bad guy being Wesker in Resident Evil 9, which is what I suggested in my video, right? I suggested that it would be interesting if Wesker kind of attacks the BSAA headquarters or takes control of it and makes all the BSAA agents turn into BOWs, because that would be kind of a crappy thing that Wesker would do to an organization that was founded by Chris and Jill, right? And obviously since Wesker hates Chris like crazy, it kind of just makes sense that he would do something that crappy, you know? But that was kind of my theory. But what do you think about that? What do you think about if Wesker was actually alive and was the one that was responsible for bringing Evelyn? And all
I
that
mean,
other
I
stuff?
wouldn't really
I personally, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wouldn't really complain, because again, we had the teases in 8 near the end of the game as Chris, showing that that Miranda was there as part of the original team for Umbrella, creating everything, right? Yeah. So I definitely could see that being a factor, because it has been noted. She was, or was with Spencer? Sorry.
Yeah, she was like Spencer's like teacher or like mentor or whatever.
It was, so yes, you're right.
You did find a lore book inside of like her lab that basically references that whatchamacallit. It references that Oswald E. Spencer shows up to Romania and kind of sees what she's been up to a couple of years ago, right? This is when he was during Alive, so obviously it has to be before 2006, and sees that, oh, well, I like what you're doing with the mold, but I'm doing my own thing. I'm starting up my umbrella company. Obviously, yeah. So if he started Umbrella, that means he visited Romania probably in the 60s, right? I'm not
Something
too familiar
like that,
with like the exact dates, guys, but I do know that like Umbrella was founded in 60 something, or maybe no before. I don't know, but yeah, I might have to double check. I'll have to double check that info.
Yeah, you're right. That's what I was thinking. It was Spencer, not Wesker, so that was on me.
Yep. But yeah. So I mean, but what are your thoughts on Wesker, whatchamacallit, being behind the scenes of the connections, and maybe he was responsible for RE8 and RE7?
I mean, it's an easy way to bring back an old character that people like. I mean, people love how over the top delusional he is, and it makes sense. Again, any way to get rid of Chris, especially now that after 5, they had the whole thing where they blew him up, if that's the case. So I definitely see him still being petty, wanting to get his one up on Chris. So that could definitely be a part of it, and especially that we have that rumored leak of apparently a major character that's supposed to be dying. I don't know if that's since changed, but I can definitely see that being a part of the story.
Oh, are you referring to like the old Resident Evil leaks? Yeah, that's a good topic as well. Wasn't Resident Evil 9 supposed to be a trilogy? I heard that Capcom stated that a long time ago. They said that RE7, RE8, and RE9 were supposed to be like the same game. And so it kind of took a lot of people by surprise when Resident Evil 8 kind of said that, oh, this is the end of the Winters family, and we're finishing up, wrapping up Shadow of Rose really quick. And so, yeah, I mean...
Well, to be fair, they did say it'd be the end of the Winters story, but there's still a story to tell with Chris now that everything led up to it.
That's a good point. Good point.
So it could still technically be a trilogy in the way the story's told. It just no longer includes the Winters family. It's now just been taken over by Chris, and because again, you can't have the BSAA stuff and then just kind of negate it, because that's been there since it was teased a little bit in 7 with the Umbrella Corp helicopter, but then it was more fully fledged in 8 with what was going on. So I can definitely see that still taking place.
Yeah, with Chris, you mean with Chris working with Blue Umbrella, which was like a good version of Umbrella to kind of fight the connections and the just bioterrorism, right? He was kind of just taking a part-time job with them. But what was interesting too, I should also say, was that Wolf Squad. We didn't really get to see Wolf Squad at all in action. You know what I mean? Like if a Wolf Squad member had died at the end of RE8, we wouldn't really care because we don't know. Like RE-verse, like Reverse, try to like have them as playable characters, and obviously that game was so bad. But what I'm getting at is that like nobody cared. Like, oh, this guy's name was Wolfhound. This guy's name was like, I don't know, like Alpha or whatever. Like it didn't make sense also. So
yeah, I heard with them they were supposed to have more time in the story to be fledged, but it got cut due to time constraints.
Yeah, so I guess that would just go back to the first thing that I asked you, right, about characters. I mean, it's kind of a given that the Hound Squad is going to show up in RE9 if Chris has to go to the BSAA. That's something I never took into account, but yeah, if they were to come back, I think Capcom definitely needs to give us more of a backstory on all of the Hound Wolf members, because
they'd have to. Yeah,
we don't really care about any of them.
we don't know any about them, and then they talk about the stories of things that they did. It's like, I don't care. I didn't see this. Like, why do I care?
Yeah. Now, if you guys want to know exactly what I think Resident Evil 9 should do, then make sure to click this video right here. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.